happy to welcome you to today's discussion on international challenges and Europe's strategic compass. We are delighted that you decided to participate in this very special event. The strategic compass has been under discussion since 2019. The European Council is called upon to adopt its final version at its session of March 24 and 25. The document is intended to strengthen the common strategic culture of the European Union and develop the idea of strategic sovereignty. The document is based on the EU Global Strategy of 2016 and tries to bring together different instruments of the EU and the common security and defense policy in an integrated approach. The latest announcements by President Putin, the threat of a large-scale conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and more generally speaking, the challenges of the post-Cold War Euro-Atlantic security order underline the necessity of such a document and a debate about it. At this point, let me introduce our distinguished guests. First of all, there's Pawel Herczynski. He's Managing Director of the European External Action Service in charge of the Common Security and Defense Policy and Crisis Response. Pawel originates from the Polish Foreign Service, where he held a number of prestigious positions, both at headquarters and abroad, such as Poland's permanent representative to the Political and Security Committee of the EU. Thank you, Pawel, for being with us tonight. We also have Sara Nanni. She's member of the German Bundestag of Bündnis 90, Die Grünen. Currently, she serves as the Parliamentary group's spokesperson on security policy. We very much appreciate Sara for being with us tonight. We also have Dr. Christian Aulbach, Deputy Foreign and Security Policy Advisor to Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Before his appointment, he served in the Foreign Ministry in very important positions. Welcome, Christian, and thank you very much for being with us tonight. We also have Professor Daniela Schwarzer, who's currently the Executive Director of the Open Society Foundation for Europe and Eurasia. From 2016 to 2021, Daniela served as the Director and CEO of the German Council on Foreign Relations, and we remember her very vividly. Furthermore, she's member of so many important institutions that it's difficult to name them all. Thank you very much, Daniela, for being with us tonight. Last but not least, Dr. Christian Mölling will be our moderator tonight. Since 2017, Christian is Research Director at the German Council on Foreign Relations and head of our program for security and defense. Previously, he worked at the German Marshall Fund of the US, at the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik. He has written extensively on security and defense matters. Thank you very much, Christian, for moderating this debate tonight. With our very distinguished guests, we want to discuss, among other topics, how the strategic compass can contribute to Euro-Atlantic security. How does it relate to NATO's upcoming strategic concept? What role should the EU take? Concentrate on security on the continent and its adjacent areas, or going more global? Or is it possibly already outdated after yesterday's announcement by President Putin? With all these questions, I can only say enjoy the evening. I wish you a fruitful discussion on a very timely subject. Without further ado, I hand it now over to Christian Mölling.
Thank you so much for the excellent introduction, and welcome to everybody here once again in a virtual room. Hopefully this may be over soon so that we at least can meet again physically as well. That would be fantastic. However, time is pressing also on this topic, on the question of the strategic compass. So we decided it's a better opportunity to meet virtually than not to meet on this topic. Before I hand over to the speakers who will give their kind of introductory remarks, let me just give a little bit of house rules to these things. This is a conversation which is completely on the record. You have press the button that you have agreed to this. So this is a kind of a real public debate that we're going to have. Please take a look into the chat where my colleagues may post some hints to you. This is also the opportunity to later ask questions through the chat or by raising your hand. This is also an opportunity. The run of show will be, I will give every speaker 5 to 7 minutes for initial remarks to give her or his perspective on the strategic compass. We will get hopefully a very diverse menu from which we can then choose. I may ask 1 or 2 or 3 questions at the beginning to the panel, but then open up to you for the question answers. So we should have an interesting 90-minute input of what we can expect from the European Union and its strategic compass, and maybe the minor points that may be left over then to be decided later on. And with no further ado, I would like to hand over for a Brussels perspective to our friends from the External Action Service. Mr. Hulk, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm really grateful for having me. Thank you very much, Christian, and many thanks to Rolf for setting the stage. And with this introduction, I hope I can still add a few elements on the ongoing work on the compass. The strategic compass should guide the European Union's action in the field of security and defense in the next 5 to 10 years. So if the question is it already outdated, in spite of the fact that we still haven't managed to adopt it, my answer very clearly not. Although, of course, the ongoing crisis in and around Ukraine would have a strong impact upon the final stretch of negotiations among member states. From our point of view, the compass is a means for the EU to become an effective security provider in our neighborhood and beyond, in cooperation with our partners whenever possible. It should be a clear-eyed document which lays out the strategic environment of the Union based on an objective, intelligence-based threat analysis, a first threat analysis that we have ever done at the EU level. The starting point of the compass is the rather grim picture of the world we face. Europe is in danger, facing old and new threats that go beyond military or territorial ones. We see this very clearly today with the situation in Ukraine, which is facing not only a Russian military buildup of enormous proportion, but also cyber attacks, disinformation, as part of a sophisticated hybrid campaign. This is just an illustration of the multifaceted threats we are facing today. And of course, the current situation injects even more urgency into our discussions and the need to set actionable and very concrete goals and objectives. This is raison d'être, the rationale of the compass. It is also a very concrete document containing sets of actionable proposals with very clear timelines and objectives. The compass is about acting, securing, investing, and deepening our partnerships. These are 4 main components. Let me now outline each of them and some of the key elements of our proposal still under discussion among member states in those 4 main areas. So first, when it comes to act, what we want to do is to act more rapidly, to act more robustly, and to act with more flexibility to crises that are happening in our neighborhood and beyond. One of the proposals that has received significant attention in this context is, of course, so-called rapid deployment capacity, which is intended to allow the European Union to swiftly project a modular force of up to 5,000 troops in a range of different crisis scenarios. Let me mention from the outset that this capacity is not a new standby force and will obviously not interfere in any way with NATO prerogatives in the field of collective defense. It is exclusively focused on crisis management beyond the borders of the European Union. So our objective is to ensure that the European Union has a stronger capacity to act when a crisis arises. It is very timely for Europeans to define actions that will enable to become an effective security provider in our neighborhood and beyond, preferably with our closest partners like NATO, like the United Nations, but also alone if there is a necessity to act on our own. Second, secure. We want to further secure our access to strategic domains, such as outer space, cyber, or the high seas. These spaces have become increasingly crowded, including with our strategic competitors, and therefore we need to strengthen our tools. It is for this reason that we have proposed to develop an EU hybrid toolbox to boost our ability to anticipate, detect, and respond to hybrid threats. This has received really a broad support among our member states. We also propose measures to counter foreign information manipulation and interference, to strengthen our cyber defenses, and to adopt for the first time ever an EU space strategy for security and defense. We also want to ensure our maritime security by maximizing the impact of the instruments that we have at our disposal. And also here, there is scope for strengthening cooperation with key like-minded partners. Countering hybrid and cyber threats are obvious examples. Third, as the EU, we need to jointly invest more and better in military capabilities and emerging technologies to fill strategic gaps and reduce industrial dependencies. There is no rapid deployment without the right capabilities and right investments. We all know that. If we want to be better prepared to respond to crises, we should do more to become more technologically able together. And here, PESCO and European Defence Fund should also help to reduce this gap. The compass should also help to maintain our cutting edge when it comes to technological innovation and further reduce our vulnerabilities and dependencies. Fourth, the compass also outlines concrete ways to deepen and think more strategically about our partnerships. This is particularly key in current very challenging times. And here, let me assure you that NATO has a special place in this section. Our relationship with NATO remains a key political priority for the EU leadership and all EU member states. It constitutes an integral pillar of our work on defense. We have already put in place a very dense cooperation agenda, building on the solid framework established with the two EU-NATO joint declarations, 2016 and 2018. Our interaction covers a broad range of areas, such as countering hybrid threats, operational cooperation, including at sea, on migration, cybersecurity, cyber defense, defense capabilities, defense industry, research, so on and so on and so on. Our cooperation continues to build upon a key principles underpinning and guiding EU-NATO cooperation, namely openness, transparency, inclusiveness, and reciprocity, but also full respect of the decision-making autonomy of both organizations without prejudice to the specific character of the security and defense policy of any of EU member states. In the past 6 years, so since the first joint declaration, we have achieved a lot. The 6 progress reports submitted jointly by the High Representative and NATO Secretary General are a clear testimony of this enhanced partnership. But of course, it is still a lot of potential to improve and to strengthen our cooperation. And exactly in the same vein, the compass should demonstrate EU's increased level of ambition for taking our long-standing strategic partnership with NATO to the next level, while also outlining concrete steps for advancing our cooperation, ranging from strengthening political dialogue, crisis management, exercises, hybrid cyber, as well disinformation and military mobility. Besides the EU-NATO relationship, the compass also looks at enhancing our cooperation with key like-minded partners such as US, Canada, Norway, and the UK. So a stronger European defense should also empower NATO and make Europe a better transatlantic partner. We do not aim to compete or to create unnecessary duplications, but on the contrary, to become a stronger partner in security and defense for both NATO and the US. A stronger EU security and defense means a stronger NATO. Our security environment requires it, and our citizens demand it. And the compass is a way to help us achieve this objective. The adoption of the compass at the March Foreign Affairs Council and NATO strategic concept a few months later at the summit in Madrid offer a unique opportunity to further enhance coherence and synergies between EU and NATO. EU and NATO must stand together to face today's and tomorrow's challenges. And precisely speaking about today's challenges, as Russia challenges European security order and is threatening Ukraine, it is more important than ever that the EU and NATO stand together. We have to show our joint commitment to the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine and reaffirm our support for and unwavering commitment to the principles underpinning the European security architecture. At the same time, we need to ensure that the actions we are undertaking and the messages we are sending to Russia, but also our partners and globally, are firm, coherent, and mutually reinforcing. At this critical juncture, we have to uphold transatlantic unity by all means. The current situation is not an issue of concern for Europe only. This is about the international rules-based order and the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of any state, as enshrined in the UN Charter. This is one of the foundational principles of international law that all states, including Russia, must fully respect. And with this, back to you. Many thanks.
Pawel, thanks so much. That was a very helpful lay of the land that you have given to us on what are the different challenges and already kind of also the pillars that the strategic compass will come up with, and also a little bit of content very much on EU-NATO that is very much appreciated to help us all to understand what the purpose and also the structure of this document will be. So then, with any further ado, I'd like to give the word to Sara Nanni and give her perspective on the strategic compass. Sarah, please.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for inviting me for this very important discussion that we have today on a very special day, to be honest. And as you can imagine, I cannot think of anything else, but I try to focus on the strategic compass nevertheless. Although it is not written down how we can build up a European classical defense situation in Europe, I think that this process around the strategic compass has nevertheless have a very good impact on the coherence in foreign policy that we see today in this current crisis. I'm really convinced that this process, who has lasted now more than 2 years, has done his work a bit by accident also. And I can imagine that maybe if we had a similar process 10 years ago, the first reaction after the annexation of the Crimea in 2014 may have already been a different one. I don't know, but I think that the strength that we see today in the European Union also lays in this project. So far, so good. As my colleague already said, there are a lot of positive things to say, but there is also a lot of potential to improve. And that's, of course, my role here to mention a few. And the first is that our civilian instruments, although I think that the current draft is a bit more specific on that issue than the drafts have been some months ago, the civilian instruments and rather a mainstreaming of a broader concept of security has not taken place in a very deep way. And I think that this is some potential to improve for the future. It's still rather poorly defined in goals and objectives in the civilian field. But also there are 2 points missing completely. This is the prevention aspect, coming from a rather small definition of security. Of course, prevention is not part of the compass at the moment. And I think that's a big pity, because we should not underestimate the potential that lies in a very good strategic prevention policy, and that is also coming from the European Union. And the second thing is that we did not have an analysis of current European policies, and I think here of security policy, but also of trade and of arms exports, that shows some honesty, and that reflects also where we as European Union may have a bad impact on the security of other regions, and where we may have been an insecurity provider. Because I think this is also part of the analysis, or it should be part of the analysis, that by accident, sometimes the policy of the European Union has a bad impact for the security situation in other states. And I think that we should be full of courage to address also these very sensible questions. And my last point would be that coming from a broader perspective of what security might be and how we can define it, and how we can also operate in terms of human security, I think that it was a good first step that all nations from the European Union came together and tried to have a common perception of security threats. But it was really only on the government level. And maybe next time we can go even further and also include the parliaments as representatives of the populations, because first of all, I think that we then may have even better analysis, an even broader analysis of what our security challenges are, and also because of democratic principle, because all the operational things that are now written down in the compass and then that are decided on the EU level, they have to be implemented by national parliaments who will pay for it and who will do the laws that we need in order to operationalize what is written down in the compass. And at the moment, I really see a lag between what the governments are talking about and what is discussed in the parliament. And we have to bring those discussions back together. And this is only possible if maybe in the review processes, or if there will be another process like this, we have a better integration of parliamentaries' views on issues of security and defense. And that's so far from me. I hope it was between 5 and 7 minutes. Thank you.
It was perfect time-wise and perfect content-wise. Thanks very much for that, Sara. So now switching towards the German government, how does the executive branch look at the strategic compass? That would be also interesting for us. So I give the word to Christian, please.
Thank you, and good evening to all of you. Thanks for inviting me to being part of this. Thanks to the DGAP for convening this a very timely discussion on an important issue. I wanted to start by looking at how the genesis of the strategic compass evolved. I feel that in the beginning, the member states, or at least some, had the feeling that CSDP had important instruments, also effective instruments, PESCO and others. But the general feeling was that an overarching structure was missing, and coherence to these instruments had to be increased. I believe that the member states were looking at finding a shared assessment of the security environment, and to my understanding, the strategic compass provides exactly that. Secondly, it was felt that common goals and interests, also priorities, had to be defined, also an important task that the strategic compass addresses. And finally, means and capabilities had to be improved, perhaps even in terms of defining concrete milestones when to reach specific goals and capabilities to be set. And all of this will be part of the strategic compass, which makes it an important overarching document. We are a little proud that Germany could be instrumental in kicking this off. As Pawel said earlier, the discussions began back in 2019. And during the German presidency in the second half of 2020, we had the EU threat analysis. That's when the practical work started on the papers, if you want. And now, during the French presidency, first half of 2022, this comes to a good end now very soon. So we see this also as a little German-French bracket, if you wish. I wanted to make the point that a compass, if you have one in your hand, it gives orientation to you if you find yourself in an unfamiliar situation or an unfamiliar environment. And you could say we are not very familiar with what's happening now in Ukraine, because these things don't happen often, luckily. We find ourselves in an unfamiliar situation in the Sahel region right now. And this is exactly what the document should provide in the future, give orientation in an unfamiliar situation, because a few months or a few years back, you have defined your priorities, your ways and means, and how you approach them. And that is a huge help in addressing new challenges that come up, that you once together have made up your mind how you want to approach these challenges. I also want to say what it is not in my mind. It is not a set of fixed decisions that you simply pull out of the drawer and you have your solution for everything. You will have to adjust and apply the shared principles to every specific situation that is in front of you. So we will never be on autopilot. There will we will not establish any mechanisms with step 1, 2, 3, and without any political control, you find yourself in a development that you cannot influence anymore. But rather, the strategic compass is here to give guidance for future challenges, and that is why it is good to finalize it quickly. If I may, I would quickly address two of the questions that, or try to address in part, two of the questions that I found in the briefing paper. One of them is whether CSDP should focus on security on the continent or rather should have a more global view. I believe that geographical distance is perhaps not the decisive yardstick. We even now have CSDP missions, say Atalanta off the coast of Africa, with huge geographic distance between Europe and where our ships cruise in the Indian Ocean, but still developments there affect us strongly, and I feel that is the criterion that we should use, whether European security and interests are affected by developments to judge whether we should have a role in addressing challenges or not. The other issue that was raised was how the strategic compass relates to the strategic concept by NATO, and Pawel also addressed this, and I'm happy about your remarks about no duplications and also keeping decision-making autonomy. I wanted to simply say that NATO has had strategic concepts for a long time, and they have, just like the strategic compass, a 10-year time scale, which is a reasonable time to choose. And I think for NATO, these documents have been always helpful and good guiding principles. So it's only a logical consequence to look at this from the EU side and to have a similar document because EU is an important security provider also. Secondly, I want to simply echo what Pawel said, that it is good that we currently have two processes running in parallel. It is a unique opportunity to make sure that the two organizations continue to work in a complementary way. Of course, they bring different skill sets to the table, if you wish. But both are important and needed. And I wanted to mention an example. That is when President Biden last Friday convened a telephone conference with heads of state and government. He invited not only the Secretary General from NATO, but also the presidents of the European Council and the European Commission, because you need both to address the current situation and developments around Ukraine. I was also encouraged by what Pawel said about the Security Council, the Strategic Compact, deepening the partnership and the interaction with NATO that has been going on for a long time. And it is important to deepen it, to continue it, and to also be sure there are no duplications. And to this end, we are looking forward to the third EU-NATO joint declaration to keep this joint effort going. So much from my side for now. Thank you.
So thanks very much for this view from the German government, and also thanks for alluding back to the role that Germany indeed played at the initial phase of the compass. So last but not least, I'd like to ask Daniela Schwarzer to come in and give her account on the strategic compass as far as it stands now. Daniela, please.
Thank you very much, Christian. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Yes, I'll stick to my 5 minutes and briefly say, first of all, on the positive side, that I think that the development of the strategic compass and the result, which we will hopefully see, or at least part of it may be published, which we will see in March, is a good thing for the European Union. It's not that the work is over with that in any way, but I think the whole process leading to the March summit, and if we look back to the global strategy and where we are now in terms of discussing the security environment that the EU is in, the engagement of member states in this discussion, we have really a far more substantive debate in the European Union on our own security and defense. And I mean, we are discussing this tonight, definitely on a day where Russia as a threat and the challenge to the European security order is very much present. And maybe we will come to that later in the debate. But I do wish to say that part of the discussion and the acceleration of Europe's security and defense debate was also driven by our worries that we had to have, at least for 4 years, about the commitment of the United States to the European security order. And I'm saying this because I think we have to contextualize the steps that the EU has made since the global strategy, with the strategic compass, with the launch of PESCO and all the different projects that go with it, like CARD, the European Defence Fund, and so on, that we may have to use these instruments in a far more forward-leaning way as Europeans, in case we move into a phase in 3 years' time where the US again withdraws from this very close relationship with Europe. And so against that backdrop, and looking at the evolution in the European Union, I do believe that the publication of at least parts of the strategic compass in March is very good news. The year 2022 definitely is one of strategic papers. As has been mentioned, we are publishing our security strategy in Germany. The China strategy will be elaborated. There is the review of the NATO strategic compass, strategic concept, and the European strategic compass. And I think the challenge here is to link all of them together in a way that, first of all, they are compatible, but also that it is very clear where responsibility lies for which part of the delivery of security to European citizens. And I deliberately emphasize citizens here because the challenge that I think the strategic compass is facing at the moment is obviously the very broad security understanding and the development of security threats that we feel outside in our neighborhood, but also within the European Union. So when I said earlier that the work will definitely not be done once the strategic compass has been agreed upon, I think it is very important then to think further who is actually the implementing body of which parts of the provision of security. And here the debate is moving on with regards to that very broad concept of security. And I think for the European Union, the challenge will be to bring its different pillars in the, within the European Commission together to discuss classical security and defense issues, but very much combined with those that we only have lately identified as actually security relevant, like technology, like economic competitiveness, the resilience of economic and financial and energy structures, and so on and so on. I wish to close with one thought about the concept of resilience, which is present in the European debate since the global strategy. There it had its role to play, but I think since it was published, it has really come to the forefront of the debate. And what it means when we speak about resilience is obviously that we have to assume vulnerability, because resilience only makes sense with the idea of bouncing back when you acknowledge you will not be able to protect, but you will actually be, there will be attacks and you have to have the ability to bounce back. And this in some ways can be seen as a technical concept where you have to make sure you have redundancies in infrastructure and so on and so on. You have the resilience of IT systems. You have energy infrastructure which can live with a blow in one part because it can be compensated by another part. But I wish to close with that observation again, that it is about societal resilience and political stability at the end of the day. So the strategic compass, the parts of it that we could see towards the end of last year, November, I think there is this understanding in it. But I believe that this will be the big challenge going forward for the European Union, to acknowledge that not only across the different policy areas and silos that I have mentioned, the task of delivering security will have to be completed, but really also in a very close understanding of how external and internal security have to work together. Thank you very much.
Daniela, thanks very much. I'll try to bind some of the things that have been said here together. But nonetheless, everybody who wants to put up a question towards the panel, feel free to either raise your hand. I should be able to see that, I guess, or Julia and her team point me towards them, or raise the question in the chat so that we can pick it up here. Thanks very much. Drawing the line from what Daniela said at the end back to what Pawel said at the beginning, is the kind of a perfect description of what was called very early on the capability expectation gap in European foreign policy, which basically says there are a lot of expectations that have been raised, what European foreign security and defense policy can achieve, but the capabilities, so the ability to implement it, are really missing all the time. So the question is, does the strategic compass do the trick this time? And if it does, how does it do it? Maybe that's a question going towards Pawel and maybe towards Christian, but also, I mean, if Sara has ideas of how do we better even get more capabilities out of it, more helpful. Capabilities, just to make it clear, is not limited to the very military understanding of capability. In my understanding, also civilian capability exists as well as industrial, technological, etc. But maybe that would be very interesting to see what does the compass change if it is published.
I assume I should start to grapple with this question first. Of course, implementation will be key. This is obvious. And this is why when drafting the strategic compass, we try to keep it as concrete as possible, as actionable as possible. And on top of it, to have very concrete timelines. I cannot go into details because this is still a subject of discussion among member states. And actually, this is one of the most contentious elements. How concrete, how actionable, and how clear timelines do we have when we speak about very concrete ideas. But from our point of view, if we are serious, there is no other way. And of course, I agree with previous speakers that it will be for member states to implement. As institutions, we are providing a forum. Of course, in the last couple of years, we have created many new instruments like MPCC, but the capabilities are not with us. They are with member states. We have also created, together with our Commission colleagues, many incentives in order for member states actually to work together, to take advantage of economy of scale, to have collaborative projects. So you have European Defence Fund that actually is a way of incentivizing member states to join forces, which is actually the biggest challenge when it comes to the capability development. So it's not first and foremost lack of funds, but this is the national boundaries when it comes to different capability development. And this is what we are trying to change. Back to you.
Thanks very much. Christian, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I'd love to. I just wanted to point out that the first chapter of the strategic compass will establish a shared assessment of the security environment. And once you undertake this, including a threat assessment, I believe and I hope that the joint spirit of addressing issues is greatly strengthened. And with the measures that Pawel described that support this process, especially the defense pact that was introduced just a few days ago, I do see incentives for member states to work together more closely in this field.
Interesting. Sarah, do you want to come in? Otherwise, I kind of draw other things into it. but happy to get.
Of course, I have an explanation why there is a gap, and I also have a solution for how to fill this gap between political ambitions and capability realities, because politics is done by people. And if there is a commitment on the paper that has been elaborated by one person, or let's say 100 persons, most of the times these are not the same people who have to implement it. As for now, I think that within the current government, neither our foreign minister of today or our minister of defense or other politicians who have to implement it have been part of the process to elaborate the compass. And of course, there is in every democracy has the right to choose new leaders, and then you have always this lack of continuity, which is a problem in international relations or in foreign policy in general, but especially if it comes to commitments that one government has done and the other one has to implement later. And I think that the solution would be to have more people who feel committed to the process because they have been included in the process, for example, parliamentarians, so that they can later be stakeholders and also be those who try to push for implementation.
The suggestion of having more buy-in by the national parliamentarians in this game possibly would help also to give more resources that could be transferred into capabilities. I mean, I fully agree. It's something where, let's put it this way, where we can't blame the institutions because they do what they taught to do. Nonetheless, it's a sheer fact that if you take a look into the incentives that we have set out, like the European Defence Fund, which has been there for quite a while now, the percentage of cooperative procurement and cooperation projects is going down. So there is something where you can ask, okay, is this why is the cooperation lacking? What is possibly, that would be interesting, what is possibly beyond reach also of the institutions of incentivizing cooperation? Are there other stumbling blocks for cooperation? Because I mean, this is the whole raison d'etre of the European Union, to make cooperation possible, right? And a big advantage of the Union also compared to other organizations like NATO, which don't have cooperation on the very granular way in their DNA. That's very much parallel working. So how comes that cooperation is going down? Or is it just a wrong observation from my side? Could also be the point. How can we? What is missing to get more cooperation into the European Union?
Let me try to give another example and another extremely important initiative that we have started several years ago, which is called Permanent Structured Cooperation. This idea is about bringing member states together in order to jointly develop certain projects. At the moment, we have nearly 50 such PESCO projects with very different member states joining up forces in order to do it together. And in my view, this is a huge success. It's still work in progress. It will take several years, and in case of some very important capability development projects, even more than several years. But this brings member states together, and on top of it, we also have a first example of third countries knocking to the doors of different PESCO projects and trying to join them, with a first positive decision about the participation of the United States, Canada, and Norway in the PESCO project on military mobility. So I think that with all these initiatives like PESCO, on part of member states, like European Defence Fund on part of the Commission. We are trying to create all the incentives for member states to do more and more things together. But at the end, the final decision is always in the hands of member states. But on part of the EU, we need to provide mechanisms that would enable countries to join forces. This is what European Defence Agency has been doing for many years, and now we are also trying to do it with the participation of the European Commission and with permanent structured cooperation among member states. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Pawel. Very good explanation, and also so my point mirrors what Johannes Ahlefeld also put into the chat. So Compass and EDF providing incentives for joint R&D. What's the view of the German government on that? Why does the number of cooperation, the percentage of cooperation, is going down?
Yes, thank you. I would have to look at the numbers because I'm not sure I share this impression from. I feel that most of modern R&D projects of a huge scale, they are even almost by standard these days are developed not by a single nation but as a joint project. Since they become more complex and more costly, it is imperative to increase the nations who are involved in this. Of course, you have issues to be addressed, such as export control standards, and efforts are underway to addressing this. Because if you develop military equipment together, you need to make sure you have the same or you have similar rules that you apply later, for example, as regards export questions. But still, I have to look at the statistics if your impression is right or mine. Thanks.
Sure, no problem. We can share the data from the European Defence Agency on that. But that's an interesting point that you made about the kind of the cooperation. I think you're right. The sheer number of money going into cooperative projects is increasing. Then the problem is that's happening outside the European Union, like the future combat air system, for example, is not part of the EU frame, which also has its reasons, I guess. Sometimes even there are reasons in Parliament because people don't want to have full transparency possibly of their money. But we have another question from the audience, from Eileen Matley, who wants to come in. Eileen, I hope we can hear you.
Yes. Hey, good evening, and thanks for convening this very interesting conversation. I would like to direct my question at Pawel, if I may. Listening to your introductory remarks, it hasn't become exactly clear to me which tasks you see the EU's security and defense policy prioritizing in the years and possibly even decades ahead. So if I understood you correctly, you said that the EU should focus a bit more on crisis management rather than collective defense, as the task of collective defense should be left to NATO. If that is correct, and if I understood you correctly in that regard, I would also like to know where do you see the manpower coming from for crisis management missions, not only civilian but also military operations, given the huge overlap of EU and NATO member states and their single set of forces. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. Thank you for the question. Look, the Lisbon Treaty is very clear about collective defense, and it says in two different articles that collective defense is the responsibility of NATO for those EU member states that are NATO allies. So again, when it comes to collective defense, we do not compete with NATO, and we have no ambitions for European Union to engage in collective defense. At the same time, Lisbon Treaty also has Article 42.7, which is called Mutual Assistance Clause, that is potentially very interesting in case one of our member states is faced with an armed aggression. This article has been invoked only once in 2015 by France due to terrorist attacks in Paris. And what we are doing now, we are having exercises with our member states in order to better understand how they understand this article and what this article means in practice. About manpower, if you look at all our missions and operations, civilian and military, and there are altogether 18 of them, we are talking about 5,000 Europeans, both civilian and military, deployed in our CSDP missions and operations. So comparing with the size of armed forces of even an average EU member state, this is quite a modest number. When it comes to our flagship initiative within the strategic compass, namely the rapid deployment capacity, again, we are talking about a number of 5,000 troops to be deployed. So again, it's a very, I would say, modest step, but still a necessary step if, as European Union, we want to be in a position to act and also act alone if necessary. Many thanks.
Anybody else who wants to come in from the panel or from the audience on these questions? So please write your questions into the chat. I take the opportunity, as there's a moment of silence, to say I very much agree with what Pawel and also Christian said on the approach to be actionable. I think this is a very well thought development in this time, because the global strategy was something that was difficult to implement. So I think this is a real learning that we can see, and I guess everybody's looking forward to see the actionable solutions that come out of it and the timelines. I think this is really something where people, you don't have an open flame for be criticized of having put up something where there's nothing that you can implement possibly easily on these regards. There is a name, possibly Spanish, Jose Ricardo Martins. I don't know whether that was actually good, but you can tell us because you now have the floor.
Okay, my name is Jose Ricardo Martins. I am Brazilian and Luxembourger, and I work at the University of Siegen, in fact. My question is about this overlaying of NATO and EU and this collective safety. But how about the member states which are not members of NATO? There are 21 EU members which are a member of NATO, but the other ones are not a member of NATO. So wouldn't be a problem for them. And together with that, the EU has also the strategic autonomy in head. So when the EU is so close to NATO, and NATO is made in great measure is controlled by the USA. In fact, the Supreme Commander is the most powerful person in NATO. EU is giving up its strategic autonomy project. I don't know who, maybe Pawel or other one. Thank you.
Who wants to pick up that question, explaining the different tasks on EU and NATO and the different roles of the member states?
Let me again maybe start. Look, when it comes to EU-NATO cooperation, clearly we are complementary. We are complementary with each other, and only by working together we can make an impact. There is an overlap. 21 of EU member states are also NATO members, but I don't feel that this should in any way complicate things. On the contrary, this should help us, provided that the same member states would present exactly the same positions in both organizations. There are also other EU member states that are not members of NATO. Some of them are working very closely with NATO, like Sweden or Finland. Others don't. But as EU, as 27, we collectively and acting by unanimity, so by the agreement of every single of the 27 member states, we have decided to work with NATO as closely as possible, of course, based on the agreed principles of that cooperation. And if you look at the NATO being responsible for collective defense, and if you look at the toolbox that the European Union has with trade, development, humanitarian, sanctions, and so on, I think that by working very closely together, we can really make an impact. On the strategic autonomy, how we understand it is an ability for us to work with our partners, and NATO is one of our preferred partners if possible, and also to act on our own if necessary. So this is the same coin, two sides of the same coin. The work on the strategic autonomy and our partnership with NATO. And I don't see really a conflict here. On the contrary, we should be able to work always with partners. But if for whatever reason our NATO partners are not in a position to join us, are not interested, then in case we have to, we should also be in a position to act on our own. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Sara Nanni, you want to come in, please?
I just want to add that I think that the events of the last 24 hours, or also of the last week, and maybe also of the next week, they will have an impact on those countries who are in the European Union at the moment, but not in NATO. And I'm pretty sure that we will see some movements there. And also, this shows, I think, that in the last 20 years, nobody was expecting NATO to be relevant for territorial defense in the European Union or in countries of the European Union. That's why some countries decided to remain neutral, not to become member of NATO. But I guess that this will change now.
So even more countries who are in EU and NATO, possibly. That would be really interesting. Johannes Ahlefeld had another very concrete question on the progress that we have made on some of the key PESCO projects, especially military mobility. I'm not sure who can give an answer to that question. That would be interesting. And the other question I'd like to put up is, as far as I understood it, because it was a very, very long description towards the question, whether the EU External Action Service is actually more a kind of I would hear it's written, a debating body, a consulting body, or does it take executive decisions for our security policy? I guess that's a question of what's the character of the institution, so to say. What's the powers and authorities, and also there on your side, but also then on the governmental side, looking towards Christian and the Chancellor's office of. So what's the division of labor here?
Let me try to answer on military mobility. This is one of the PESCO projects, but this is also one of the key flagship projects of EU-NATO cooperation. Of course, in order to see concrete results, you need a lot of money and very often a lot of time, especially if we are talking about infrastructural projects like building bridges, tunnels that would be fit in order to transport military equipment from one country to another country in Europe. This is what we are doing within this financial perspective. For the first time, we had an allocation within the EU budget. It's a quite substantive allocation, although not as high as we wanted it to be. Let's see how this will develop in the next multi-annual financial perspective. But at the same time, military mobility is not only about huge, costly and timely infrastructural projects. It is also about administrative burden. It's also about bureaucracy. How many papers do you need to fill in order to move a tank from one country to another one? And here we really have a lot of progress in order to standardize and to simplify the bureaucratic burden upon forces of member states moving within Europe. So it's a work in progress. It will take time. It requires a lot of money, but I think that we are very well on track. On the EEAS, is it a talking shop? Well, for the wider audience to judge, of course, High Representative and the EEAS that is serving the High Representative, those institutions have been created with the Lisbon Treaty. So it's still, I would say, too early to say. In my view, also looking at the number of CSDP missions and operations, we are really making a difference, a very concrete difference, with 5,000 EU soldiers, policemen, judicial experts, border guards, and so on, deployed in 3 continents. We are also making a difference with many new initiatives like European Peace Facility. We haven't spoken about it yet. This is for the first time ever that the European Union is in the position not only to train armed forces of our partner countries, but also to provide them with equipment, including lethal equipment. This is what we have been doing only since last year. Assistance measure focusing not only on Africa, but also on Western Balkans, also on Eastern Partnership countries. Precisely now, as we speak, member states are discussing about assistance measures for this year, and we are talking about 500 million euro to provide with very concrete military equipment to our partner countries. So with those 2 examples, CSDP missions and operations and European Peace Facility, I hope that we are far more than only a place to talk and to discuss. If we had more time, I could give many more examples, of course. Many thanks.
Thanks very much. Christian, how does the EEAS look from a government point of view? What is it from where you sit?
Thank you. I hope I make Pawel happy when I say the EEAS is, of course, far more than a consultative body. Just think about the EU delegations around the world. And I want to remind the audience that not every EU member state has an embassy in every state. And often the EU delegations help these countries who are not represented in a specific host country. Also, EU delegations bring together the heads of missions to meetings, to form debates, to develop a joint perspective on, say, the human rights situations in a host country. And all this is far more than providing consultative services. Thank you.
That sounds rather positive. Not sure whether Sara would like to come in on that as well, have her perspective on the External Action Service. Otherwise, I will take a look again.
I would agree with what Mr. Aulbach said.
Good. So everybody is in favor of the External Action Service. I mean, that's exactly, that's good news, isn't it? Pretty well. Let me, if there's no other question now in the room, let me come back to the point that that Daniela raised in her remarks on the positioning of the European Union between the so to say, a possibly difficult US in the future and an already difficult Russia today, and also possibly difficult China tomorrow. Is there anything that the compass really can help on that, or is it very much focusing more on the crisis management part of it and a little bit on the resilience part? So how does it help us there on, let's say, the geopolitical competition that has been described so often in recent months and years? What's the kind of the instruments that, or the guidance on the one hand, possibly also the instruments that come out of it? Is there anything you can hint us towards? Maybe Pawel or Christian.
Many thanks, and here I would come to what Sara has said at the very beginning about the European security and defense culture. And I want to stress that it was not by chance that we have developed a very lengthy and very inclusive, and also I would say extremely transparent process of negotiation of the compass with our member states. As many of you have said, nearly 2 years. On the contrary, it was done on purpose, especially due to the fact that we felt that we need to be basically on the same page when it comes to how we see the threats and challenges. And to bring 27 member states on the same page is, to be very frank with you, is a challenge. But I hope that we are more or less there. And one of the initial chapters of the strategic compass is called The World We Face. And precisely in this chapter, we are planning to describe our relationship with key world powers, including with the US, with China, and with Russia. But what I want to stress here is that we see those three relationships very different. US is a like-minded country. We work very closely. There are differences from time to time, but what we want to really make sure is that as much as possible we speak in one voice. Let me also add that we have developed a very intense network of consultations with the US. We have consultations on Russia, we have on China, we have on Indo-Pacific. We are now starting a security and defense dialogue with the US. So a lot brings us together. We were also working very closely with the previous US administration. This had certain challenges, I have to admit, but like-mindedness is the essence of our bilateral relationship with the US. In case of China, we have three principles. China is a partner, on climate change, for instance. China is also a competitor, for instance, on trade issues, and it's also a systemic rival. But still, we have channels of communication with China open. We are planning a new summit with China. I think the date is set at the beginning of April. I will have security and defense dialogue with China this Friday, and this is a yearly event that has been going on for 11 years now. Sometimes these discussions are very difficult. Sometimes we can only agree to disagree on certain issues, but still we are convinced that it is essential to talk to China and to make sure that China understands that the international order, that the rules-based order actually plays in favor of China, while acknowledging that China, with its growing economy and growing significance, want to play a bigger role within the international rules-based order. Russia, on the contrary, as we have seen over the last, yes?
No, sorry, I was just saying goodbye to Sara Nanni. She has to leave earlier because of the event. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm already late. Thanks you. Thank you. Have a good discussion. See you soon. Bye. So
see you soon again. Bye-bye. Sorry, Pawel, to interrupt you, but please carry on, because I think that's a very interesting dimension on the how do you engage with the Chinese and how complicated that is. That's fascinating.
On the contrary, Russia clearly is a spoiler, and you know, the events of last couple of weeks clearly demonstrated. So it's also not in our interest to push Russia and China closer together. On the contrary, I think that we should use every opportunity we have in order to talk to the Chinese and to present our arguments to the Chinese. Sorry for being a bit too long.
No, that wasn't too long. That wasn't too long. I think that's, I mean, we are kind of looking into a triangle relationship here. Christian, wherever you want to come in, just raise your hand so that I can kind of draw you into this, please.
Yes, I'm happy to add a few words. I feel that the strategic compass addresses the geopolitical challenges in several ways. First of all, it includes this shared assessment of how we look at the world and what security environment we are in. And this is a 360 view. It covers the globe, basically. Secondly, Pawel was talking about securing access to strategic areas, and that includes space and cyber. And certainly geopolitical challenges are reflected in these strategic areas. And finally, you are a part of the geopolitical system, even if you strengthen your resilience at home, because strengthening your cyber capabilities or hardening your systems means that you become more resistant towards whoever tries to harm you. And again, geographical distance is not the decisive yardstick.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, if you look forward in the development, or kind of backwards and forwards, what the European Union has done in the past with regard to Russia and the offer towards the European neighborhood, what's the we don't need to refer necessarily to the compass, or what's the solution, or what's the kind of the direction that we could expect in the future? Because I guess this is a pertinent question for now, not to managing the immediate crisis that we're currently in. I think that's nothing for a kind of whatever kind of neighborhood policy instrument. But what's the outlook on this dimension in the future? Because it's, I mean, that may be geography, but it's political geography, right? So it's managing those who are not part of the European Union and helping them, and without making them part of the European Union. So what can Ukraine expect in future as support from the European Union?
If I may immediately jump in, so our actions are happening in parallel on three tracks. The first track is, of course, diplomacy, and here you know, we support first and foremost OSCE, because it's the most inclusive format, bringing everyone around the same table. And this is precisely an organization that has been established to deal with the security architecture. But we are also supporting further discussions with Russia by NATO in the format of NATO-Russia Council, as well as bilateral discussions with the US. And here the contacts that we have with US are truly excellent. The second parallel track is deterrence. As we speak, our foreign minister are discussing the issue of sanctions. Here we have been crystal clear to Russia that any further aggression against Ukraine would result in severe consequences. And the third parallel work strand is our support to Ukraine. And if you look at this support over the last couple of years, it is really impressive. Even in the recent days, microfinancial assistance has been agreed, 1.2 billion euro. We have a civilian mission in Ukraine. Member states have just agreed also to use European Peace Facility in order to finance military advisors that would reform Ukrainian professional military education system. Especially our colleagues from the Commission side are helping on energy, helping on trade. It's a really a huge effort. And since 2014 we have association agreement with Ukraine and CFTF, which basically brings Ukraine extremely closely, both economically but also politically, to the European Union. And then, of course, we have to recognize aspirations of Ukraine to become one day a member of European Union. At the moment, this is not on the table, but Ukrainians are very clear on their European aspirations. So I think that it's not, by the way, only the case of Ukraine. It's also the case of Georgia and Moldova, the three of the most advanced countries in the Eastern Partnership. So there is a lot we are doing for them, and I think that especially now in this extremely difficult times for them, when they are under huge pressure, they should feel that we are there in order to help them, and this is precisely what we are doing in those three different and parallel layers. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Pawel. Possibly the last question for today is coming from Kerstin Toba. She asked whether the Russian narrative towards Ukraine as part of the homeland, so as part of Russia, could be seen as a template for China. There we also have, for China and Taiwan. So there we also have the discussion of this is Chinese homeland and etc. etc. Is that something where you see a parallel in different dimensions? One could say what we, and that's kind of a little insinuating what I'm saying here, how we behave today towards Russia defines possible reactions by China in the future, because it's the same challenge. That's my interpretation. You can have a different one. I'm not sure you would agree to it, but how do you see this kind of link between China, Taiwan, and Russia in the Ukraine?
I think these two regions are very hard to compare, as it's always difficult to make comparisons. But the right way for us in the current crisis with Russia and Ukraine is to uphold our principles and to make clear that our support is unwavering for everything we stand for and the UN Charter stands for. And this is, again, a yardstick that is never wrong and that can be applied, I think, universally. I would leave it at that.
Thanks, Christian. Pawel, do you want to add something to that, please?
I can only add that I fully agree.
Perfect. No, I guess that was that's something that everybody understands, that this is a kind of an interesting testing time that we're facing. So it's my pleasure to thank you both for the time that you've spent. I'm sorry that our two other speakers had to drop off because of other commitments they had. All came up due to the Ukraine or Russia crisis, however you want to put it. So thank you especially to Christian and to Pawel that you stayed with us. And I hope to see you soon again, because I guess there's new room for a debate once the strategic compass is out. And I also like to thank everybody in the room for staying with us, posting also interesting questions to us. And I would hand back to Rolf. Rolf, please.
Thank you very much for this very interesting debate, to all of our speakers and panelists, and also for everybody who stayed till the end. I learned a lot in this debate. It's a very, very interesting subject, and we will need to work out some of these issues more closely when it comes to the implementation. And I'm sure that with the events of today, the European Union will do this in a very strong way and in a way that is convincing to our partners, but also possibly to our non-partners, or how should I call them? So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you, Christian, for moderating, and I wish you all a very nice evening, and hope to see you soon somewhere on the plateau of the DGAP or elsewhere. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.